Alright, the next little gift that we're going to whittle out, this is Whittling Small Gifts to Give Away, is these, it's going to be a little canoe for, that sits on that. Now, there's nothing really difficult to draw this out. This is just a little canoe that you draw out, and I want him a little bit more of a curvature on the top side here. And then I just went on the back here and I just drew out my little piece, sort of like that. In other words, it goes down. So, and then I've got the little paddle that I'm gonna cut off. In other words, I just made always make things a little bit bigger. I'm sorry, the wind here in Texas has been tough. It's been a very, very windy day, and let me do something. Let me make this a little bit easier to control. So this little piece here, and I wanted it to fit. It's gonna hang over just a little bit on a, oh my goodness, I don't have, anyway, this is about, this is just barely under 2 inches long. And this is about an inch wide, is what it is. It's an inch wide by 2 inches long. And of course, a lot of this is going to be cut off to represent. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to follow this line pattern from our, to make the canoe. As you can see there, we see how it begins to take shape here, and we're going to go over to this end and we're going to do the same thing. And we're going to do the it sort of in the end gives you a little oval shape, is what it does when you're through with your piece. As you can see, I thought a canoe would be a nice little gift to give away on a little piece. It's just kind of a unique. And remember that a canoe is sort of a. I never did use canoes all that much. Now with kayaks. That's the big thing now. People can fish out of them, and a canoe was a good resource to play with. And when I'm saying play, I'm talking about the fact they were good to you know, go down creeks and rivers with them and just kind of enjoy the day and stuff. But they weren't much good for fishing or anything like that. And now they're making these kayaks that got little fishing, you know, fishing wells on them, bait wells, you know, that keep the fish alive and stuff. They got all kind of fancy stuff on them now. But when I was a boy, you know, canoes, I saw a lot of canoes that were handmade and they were quite impressive to look at, the way they were made. And we sort of bring this to a point up in here, just like that, in other words. And they were quite impressive to make. My father used to build boats, but he built little cabin cruisers. And so, you know, the canoes were, especially for freshwater fishing mostly. I did a lot of saltwater fishing when I was a young man, so a canoe would not have gone right in a rough lake that we would go in sometimes and stuff. So, okay, you see how we're shaping it now? How it's beginning to get its look. And we want to get the shape down first before we start digging into the because you want to get your shape before you start actually digging into the center of it, in other words. And so we did not have kayaks when I was a young boy. I have been in canoes. I've paddled canoes. It's not, you know, it's not a hard thing. But like I said, it was mostly, you can fish out of them, but most time we just, we had a boat with a motor on it. Although now with canoes you can actually, of course it's almost impossible. The problem is putting a motor on the back of this thing. In other words, it was because it came to a point you couldn't hardly put a motor on it. And so canoes were real popular when I was young. I've been in canoes, I've been in rowboats. I was in a rowboat. Now, that'll wear you out. old rowboats. And now, basically, the flat bottom boats, or the bottom johns, what we call them, you know, I'm sorry, you know, were what canoes were based upon. And I'm sorry, that's why I told you the wind is so strong today. So canoes were unique things, and we used them a lot when we were young. But I was a saltwater fisherman, my dad and all of us boys, so we didn't do a lot of freshwater. But your freshwater fishermen use canoes a whole lot. Like I said, with the kayaks today that they make, they're rigged out for fishing stuff and everything. People are using those to go fishing with. One of the things about a canoe, the thing is, when we were young, is that a canoe could get in if you wanted to fish out of one and stuff, which you could. It could get, it could get into these small sloughs and stuff that a boat and motor couldn't. We didn't have a lot of trolling motors back then, or we didn't use one. They did. And you know, you couldn't get into the sloughs, the real shallow sloughs, to get into fishing and stuff like that. And there's where a canoe came in handy. So canoes weren't a pleasure craft back then as much as they were to go fishing in small sloughs and stuff like that. So, and of course, you know, the canoes came from the Indians, I believe. All right, now we've got the shape looking pretty good right in here. We do. Now, this is where we take and go to our gouge. Let me see if I can find my small gouge. Here it is. Here's my small gouge. And what we simply do, and what I like to do, let me go ahead and bring this, let me bring my knife here, bring this to a point a little bit better. What we want to do is take our canoe and want to just leave a little line on the edge here and draw around just a little, draw around like that, okay? And that will be the inside of our canoe as we draw this stuff. Come up, bring this to a point even more. But for your freshwater fishing, going into sloughs and even some saltwater sloughs and stuff, and you take your gouge and you just go along this thing. And you be careful when you get to the end over here, because the grain sort of changes on you, so you want to be real careful. And a lot of people, but more canoes were used for pleasure more than anything, where people that just wanted to, not wanted to fish, but wanted to go down. And kayaks are used that way also these days. You're watch it, because your grain seems to change over here just a little bit. So and we start kind of digging this out in here. So you want to be careful now. Don't try to take out too much at one time. And as you try to hold it here, it's a little bit difficult to hold, but you just kind of grab hold of it. Just like that. And then you turn it around and you go the other way. Just like that. Yeah, your grain really changes pretty good along these lines. Now, a lot of people have a hook knife, but this is a miniature, so a hook knife would not work with something this small. Now, what I'm going to do is switch over to my larger gouge right here and see maybe if I can get a little bit more. There we go. A little bit more out of it than just that. But you gotta be careful, because this is very small and very close to your hands. And if you want to, the best thing to do, I would say, is to put it in a vise and do it, in other words. But I can't film that right here, so I'm going real slow. You can see. And this is what I'm saying. Right here, see the grain changes and it whips back the other way. Just like this right here it does. Now, another way that you can do it is you can actually use your knife. You can take your knife. You want to be careful now, but you take your knife and you just come around like that, in other words, okay? And then you take your knife and you come this way with it And that way, excuse me, got to grab hold of it. That way, again, look at that. You take that portion out like that. And you do the same thing here. And cut that out. And go back over it again. And cut it again, and there you go. You take, and then you just kind of take your knife and you just sort of cut it out. What you do is a matter, I'm sorry, it's a matter of V-cuts. Go. And you take small cuts and you begin to remove the wood. Once again, as I've said, if you have not learned the control of using a knife, don't do these projects. These are projects that, I'm sorry, are very small. Even I have a hard time holding them sometimes. Of course, my old hands, I mean, most of you got stronger hands than I do. And what you do, you just have to keep cutting back and forth to take those pieces out of there, in other words. To kind of get it started. Yeah, these kayaks now, they've gotten, actually a canoe back when I was young was not very much money. They were primitive type canoes, but they weren't, you know, they didn't cost an arm and a leg. And like I said, most people that didn't have money to fish, they wanted to fish, but they didn't have the money to get a boat and motor, because that was expensive back then. They used a canoe, and they caught fish too, just like everybody else. But the advantage of the canoe, like I said, was to be able to get into the small sloughs that a man could fish in and get them. See, now we're starting to show, but the knife is good to sort of go around the edge of that outside, in other words, and you don't go. And so that was the way that people got to fish and didn't have to worry about getting a motor and all that other stuff. So, but people at one time were very, very active. On the weekends they were out in the outdoors, and then you take your little, you know, to make it. There we go. See. Go. And those were some wonderful times back then. My dad, we fished every weekend. We went out in the boat and fished, and we caught crabs. We caught fish. I remember one time we went out to the East Jetties down here in southeast Texas. Caught, that time you could catch as many as you want. We caught something like 70 to 80 speckled trout. And boy, we had a blast. We did. Of course, when you come home, you had to clean all that stuff. But you know, I had had enough experience in cleaning fish, and when I turned 16 years old, I went to work. Well, actually, I was 15. Went to work for a man cleaning fish. He was a commercial fisherman, and he'd go out there and he'd come home in the afternoons. Excuse me. And I would go over there and I would clean the fish for him, clean his boat, do all those type of things, and he would pay me a whopping $1.50. That was all he paid me back then. This was probably, let's see, I would have been 15. That would have been in the late 60s, probably sometime. He paid me a whopping $1.50, and I was happy for it. I know people today wouldn't even bark at that, or as a young kid, but that, to them, you know, that was some spending money back then. Okay, when you get on these edges like here, you want to be careful. So I spent a lot of my life cleaning fish and doing things like that, and kind of like an old deckhand, you know, for people. And this old man went out and caught all kind of fish. But he's as tight as a, he was tight as a, as your mama's hat pin. Like my old daddy used to say, he was so tight he wouldn't spend a nickel to see a termite eat a bale of hay. And that was an old saying. And he was tight, so he didn't pay me much. But, and he would sell them old fish to people, and it was a different era. It was a different time and a different era. And I think the old man just, he used that just to pay for his fishing. Gas wasn't, you know, gas was about 19 cents, 20 cents, 20, maybe 25 cents a gallon. So we didn't have any problems there. Now what it cost to, I was talking to a man the other day who's a fisherman, and his boat, he's a shrimper, and he was telling me that just to fill his boat up was $1,000 with that diesel. And I thought, wow,